The following show is based on historical records and may reflect language or socio-political attitudes that were, while not appropriate to use in 2018, used in the eras being discussed. Listener discretion is advised.
I am human, I am love, and my heart beats in my blood. Love will always win. Underneath the skin, everybody's got a pulse. Everybody's got a pulse.
Welcome to Beautifully Broken. I'm your host, Stephanie Sabaron. If you or someone you care about has a disability, or even if you are simply a deep introspective thinker with no health issues, do you ever think about what your or their lives would be like if you or they had been born in a different time in history? It's something I wonder about myself, being a person with a long-term chronic illness and having various disabilities as a result. Only 100 years ago, if a person had a disability, they would either have ended up living in the street, being institutionalized, or would have joined the circus or a freak show to survive. Horrible history, I know, but unfortunately it's history we can't afford to forget. There were no protections or human rights laws to protect persons with disabilities. In fact, 50 years ago, persons with disabilities were still being largely institutionalized. In this podcast, we'll learn about and explore the good and the ugly history of individuals with disabilities and the disabled community, from the innovators and inventions to the fight for disability rights and everything in between. While we have come a long way, there are still many barriers to break down. Now, I love using humor when it's appropriate, and we need to be able to laugh at ourselves, correct? And a recent video put out by actress Lauren Potter, who has Down syndrome and played Becky Jackson on the television show Glee, takes a humorous shot at the term special needs. Have a listen.
People with Down syndrome have special needs. Special needs? Really? It would be special if people with Down syndrome needed to eat dinosaur eggs. That would be special.
One dinosaur egg. Enjoy.
Man, I think you were totally right about Lindsay.
If we need to wear a giant suit of armor, that would be special.
I got a condo in Manhattan. Baby girl, what's happening? So gonna get to clapping. Go pop a phone.
It would be special if we needed to be massaged by a cat. If we needed to be woken up by celebrity.
Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey. Where are you? You may know me from Scrubs or Office Space. A few darker flicks, The Rock, Platoon, Wall Street. Funny story, I played Ben.
Get out.
My bad.
That would be special. But what we really need is education, jobs, and opportunities, friends, and some love, just like everybody else. Are these needs special?
To see the video, go to YouTube and search for Not Special Needs March 21st. Today on Beautifully Broken, we'll explore the history of disabled persons in freak shows, sideshows, and circuses. Freak shows and circuses have a much longer and more storied history than most people are aware of. In fact, freak shows actually date back to the court of Queen Elizabeth I, with the use of court jesters, many of which had disabilities, as entertainment for the nobility. And while there are many schools of thought on whether freak shows, sideshows, and circuses were blanketly exploitive and cruel, or whether in some cases they provided a career, money, and community, the debate will continue. Joining me today to speak about the history of circus is Professor Vanessa Toulmin of the University of Sheffield, the home of England's National Fairground and Circus Archive. Welcome to the show, Professor Toulmin.
Hello.
You're the resident circus expert at the University of Sheffield, correct?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm a professor of early film and entertainment history at the University of Sheffield.
Could you tell us about the National Fairground and Circus Archive and how it was founded?
The National Fairground and Circus Archives was founded in 1994, and I founded it when I was a student at the university. And it was originally a fairground archive and entertainment, and it was founded because my family, I'm from the fair, my family is show people, and I wanted to preserve the heritage of my family's community. So we started with a small collection. I'm no longer the director. I now have other roles in the university, but the archive is run by the University Library. It reorganised itself this year as the National Fairground and Circus Archive, and it's the largest collection of material relating to the history of fairs and circuses in the UK.
Wow. Did you ever work in circus yourself, or were these previous generations?
No, I was born on a fairground.
Oh, wow.
A carnival, you would call. So, no, my family are fair people, show people. It's a different connection. In America and in Canada, you call them carnival people, but in England and in Europe, you have to be born into the family. So it's handed down. So I'm sixth generation. My family ran fairs for many years. And my cousins and my aunts are still involved in the business, but not my direct family anymore.
Well, that must have been a fascinating childhood.
Yeah, it was interesting, but you don't find it fascinating when you're in it, do you? So it's just like a normal childhood to you. You grow up on a fair, you work on a fair. And I'm still very much part of that travelling fairground community.
If you could tell our audience about how circuses evolved. Circuses started, 250 years ago?
Yeah, circuses were founded. What we know as the invention of modern circus occurred in April 1768. There was a man called Philip Astley and his wife Patty, and what they basically did is brought together three different traditions. They brought together the tradition of the street and the acrobats and the street theatre, the equestrian riders and play of horses and equestrian riding, trick riding, and clowning. So they put all those three together in a circle of 13 metres or 42 foot on Halfpenny Hatch and Westminster Bridge in London, and that is when what we call circus was actually invented or started 250 years ago. And this year in the UK we've been celebrating that throughout the year. Hundreds of events have just unveiled statues and plaques to Philip Astley, the inventor of the modern circus.
And did he just start out using animals, or were there were physical performers in the circuses as well at the time?
Animals were not part of the early circus, just the horse.
Okay.
So the wild animal tradition is an American invention. In England and Europe we have the menagerie tradition, which goes back to the 12th century, the display and curiosity of animals, and they have a separate tradition. In the 1830s, a man called Van Amberg from America, a lion tamer, came over. It was the American circus who really developed the wild animal and then brought that into Britain and Europe. So before then it was essentially the horse and trick riding, acrobatics and clowning, and that's what Philip Astley did. He brought them all together. His first clown was called Mr. Merriman, and then he had acts, literally acrobats, street acts, rope walkers, all of those within the ring.
What about the use of, I guess the connection to, were sideshows an offshoot of that, or were they a separate thing?
The sideshows in England and Europe go back to the fairgrounds. Well, there's two traditions. There's very much the fairground, the sideshows. So the word show, showman, as the word implies, are the shows on the fairground. So you'd have theatre shows, you would have magic lantern shows, you would have all these different kind of shows. And the sideshow, which in North America becomes synonymous with the display of people, is actually just a word for a show on the fairground. In Europe, you get two traditions. You get the sideshow, i.e. the fairground tradition, where you get people acts on the fair, and then you also get what you call prodigies, which are people which we would now think of them as people with disabilities or differences, who would actually be displayed in shops, in cabinet rooms, and part of aristocracy. So they were, so Tom Thumb, the most famous one, Charles Stratton, Barnum brought him over in 1844 to England, but he was never on a fairground or a circus. He was displayed in the Royal Polytechnic in London.
Right, and then there's Joseph Merrick as well, correct?
Well, Joseph Merrick was on a fairground for a bit of his time.
Yeah.
But that's, so you have that. So he was on the fairground, but they were never in the circus, if you see what I mean. They were the circus, the fairground and the midway tradition are two separate things in Europe and America. So the sideshow, what Barnum did and what American showmen did was put the sideshow and the midway next to the circus.
Right.
So when you go to a North American circus in the 19th century, you went through a midway, and the midway was essentially sideshows.
Okay, so they were very different traditions by the sounds of it.
Yeah, they're very different traditions. traditions, I mean, Barnum drew on the tradition. A lot of the early prodigies that he brought over from Britain and Europe and took back to America. But they were very much so in England. So I'm looking at a poster now for the French giant, and he was exhibited in a public house, you know. And the sideshow act in the 18th and 19th century were very much, it was very expensive to see. There were 2 shillings to see. Wow. They would have their own salon. People would go and converse with them, or they were exhibited in arcades, you know, early shopping precincts. You know, there was a distinction between the fairground tradition and this display on the high street or in kind of salons.
Right.
2 different traditions.
So a lot of it was geared towards entertaining aristocracy?
Entertaining aristocracy and the middle class. You know, so some of the most famous acts of that period would never have been on the fairground because it would have been too expensive. So one of the most famous ones is Patrick O'Brien, the Irish giant, and he was exhibited in pubs or salons. He had his own rooms and people came to see him and he would tell the story of his life. Or Cardiff Giants. You know, so they had lives and stories. And so when Barnum came to England, he exhibited and presented Tom Thumb, Charles Stratton, at the Egyptian Hall in London, which is a very big, huge, almost like a place where people went to see marvels of Egypt and educational. And he put Tom Thumb into that context and charged a shilling for him, which was a lot of money at the time.
I guess I'm wondering what the fascination was with using people with disabilities as acts. Was it because people weren't used to seeing that every day, or was it just a novelty to them?
I think it's a difficult thing to understand because there were so many different types. So you had so many acts and different aspects of them. So there was the ones that were actually, they would be described as different or special. So you would get bearded ladies. Bearded ladies were very popular. And so they would be displayed as extremely feminine but had a beard.
Okay.
And then you would also get people who could, Kobalkov was one of the most famous acts. And Nikolai Kobalkov was from Prussia. He was born without any arms or legs. He was presented as the human trunk. But he married twice, had 21 children, and founded much of the Fairground dynasty in Austria. So every story is different. There are ones that are obviously the Hottentot Wiener, Sarah Bartman, who was displayed very badly, and quite an extreme story of exploitation. And when she died, her body was mummified and still put on display. So that's the other level, you know. So within the story of the freak show or the sideshow, there are many different types of acts and performers. Some performers are very skilled, very incredible, and other performers, it's obviously just people with mental or physical ailments which are being exploited.
Right.
It's a very difficult to just say one answer to that because it's a case-by-case aspect.
Well, of course, they're human beings, so they all have individual stories.
Yeah. The most famous one, obviously, Anna Swan, the Nova Scotia giantess, who actually was her own manager, her own person, her own promoter, her own booker.
Wow.
Why do people want to see people with difference? It's a very strange aspect, but the argument is that people still do now, don't they?
True. That's true.
And it is about that. And it's one of the things is that people would travel to see something different. And interestingly, the freak show, and I really don't like using that term, but the terminology of the time, the sideshow or the freak show, when you get great wars or when you get people suddenly with a lot of disabilities through suffering on the, you know, violence and war, that's when the freak show declines. So it goes up and down. So I think sometimes it is. They want to see something that's different. They don't see it every day.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you, is that in the 1800s, there seemed to be a surge in popularity of these shows, especially in the Victorian era, and that's why I was wondering why there seemed to be an upsurge in the Victorian era of that.
I don't think it's just sideshows or freak shows. The Victorian era is the era of the industrialization of entertainment. So everything becomes, you know, you get the birth of the musical, you get the growth of the circus, you get the development of the fairground, you get the development of variety theatre and vaudeville, and you also get people with money. People are working longer hours, but they're also getting better paid. People are travelling more, the extension of the railway. So you get the burgeoning of a whole leisure class in the 19th century. So that enables more people to go and see more things. And so everything becomes bigger and everything becomes more available. So you suddenly get a proliferation. I mean, like in Liverpool, there was 50 venues for waxworks and sideshows in the 1870s. 50. And because the population always wanted people, there was always Blackpool, where I spend a lot of time working, there was 25,000 theatre seats to fill a day. You know, so leisure was a major part of the activities of the middle class, working class. So it's wasn't. In fact, it almost became taken away from the aristocracy and widened out for everyone to see.
And I'm wondering, too, with the treatment you were talking about, in some cases, obviously, they were treated very badly. I know in North America, they had, even though in some cases they were treated badly, there was also very much a sense of community, and they were able to meet people, other people like themselves, and have that sense of community, get married, etc. Did you find that in the UK as well?
Oh, yeah. You definitely find that the whole community of, well, they saw themselves, and they are performers.
Yeah.
They were classed as performers. They would have, if you go through any of the performers' handbooks or yearbooks, they would be part of that performing world. So, as I say, it's going back to the circus, it's the same aspect, that you're unified by your bond of being from the circus performer or from the fair. You're a travelling entertainer. So I did an exhibition many years ago, and I worked with a family, and there was a sideshow performer called Johnny, who used to be called the Irish Leprechaun, and he basically he was wealthy. He had money. He didn't need to go on the sideshow and exhibit, but he wanted to because he wanted to be within a community of people who didn't stare at him, he said.
Exactly. People of like experiences, similar experiences. Yeah.
So that was kind of an interesting aspect. But again, that's one example. There were other people who would argue that freak shows are the pornography of the disability movement. So, there's always different views on this, and I try and look at the context of where people are working or being exhibited or being presented or being managed or exploited. It all depends. Every act has a different story.
Well, exactly, and I think that's the thing why the debate will always continue, because there are so many schools of thought on it.
I think it's better to have a nuanced approach and look at the context part by part. And obviously, Sarah Bartman, obviously a horrendous story. Anna Swan, a more uplifting story. Charles Stratton, probably at his height in the 1860s when he married Lavinia Warren, one of the most famous and richest men in the world, in the entertainment world, as Tom Thumb.
Yep.
So, exactly, so they say, well, because Charles Stratton was fantastic. Cheng and En, the two brothers who were conjoined twins, who now the name Siamese twins come from them. They were married, they had 21 children, and they appeared with Barnum only twice, but because they wanted more money to send their children to college.
And they ended their lives as farmers, correct?
Yeah, they had farms, they had children, and they went and had lucrative contracts. So, it's a question. It's a question that people always ask me, and I always say it's difficult to quantify because obviously we know we have stories. We also know that the pamphlets that are put out by people who are performing in these shows were often put out by the manager. We all know the story of Joseph Merrick. It's a tragic, horrible story.
Yeah.
But the hospital and the medical profession made as much money, if not more, out of Joseph Merrick than the fairground or the entertainment profession did.
Of course, and they probably still are to some degree.
Well, yes, and I know people today who I've spoken to, when you look through it, there is this aspect about the medical profession and the objectification in the 19th century of differences and measuring and what was perfect and what wasn't perfect, what was normal and abnormal. They were the one who classified the people in far more ways than the entertainment business did.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why he didn't want to be examined anymore, correct? Because he said he felt like an animal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that was the person who so-called rescued him, Sir Frederick Treves.
Right.
When it's really not the case. You get the famous examples, but there are so many other stories.
Of course.
Who are very entertaining. And part of my role is uncovering those stories and finding out those stories and wondering what happened to them. And some of these are quite... So, I found a case recently, and there was an American fat woman. And one of the interesting things about fat women shows is looking at people who are obviously large or what we class as overweight. When you actually read into them, what they are is striptease shows.
Really?
Yeah, some of them become striptease shows. But this is a woman called Charlotte, and she was being exhibited in London, and she was in charge of her own show. And the handsome cabbie refused to let her in the cab because she was too big, and he was worried that his cab would break.
Wow.
And she sued him. She sued him for loss of earnings that she couldn't get to the show because she couldn't get in a cab.
What era was this?
This is in the 1840s.
Wow.
But he won his case.
He won the case. Wow.
He won the case and said, because she would have broken his carriage and then he would have been out of business. All she missed was one show, and he would have lost his livelihood.
That was the mentality, though, at the time, right? That they were going to side with him. Yeah. That's terrible. With circus acts today, because a lot of them are gone, or the animal acts have been removed, so they've evolved into things like physical performance, like Cirque du Soleil. What do you see as the legacy for circuses now?
Well, I see Cirque du Soleil as a circus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any difference, you see. I see the movement of contemporary circus within the history of circus. So Cirque du Soleil is without doubt the most commercially lucrative and viable circus that has been in existence. It employs 7,000 people. It has 29 shows traveling all over the world. It produces a view of circus which is bigger than anything we've ever seen.
Oh, it's huge.
So and it also creates a community of incredibly skilled, fantastic people in Montreal and throughout Quebec who are incredible circus performers. So that having Cirque du Soleil in that area creates a massive skill area for people who then do other things like Seven Fingers, who are an amazing company. So, I come to Canada a lot, and I think Canadian circus is the best in the world. I still do.
Wonderful. We love to hear that.
No, it is. And I think what was interesting with the closure of Barnum and Bailey Ringling Brothers last year, suddenly there was this whole fear in North America or in America, there was no circus anymore. It was just one type of circus which had gone, which is the three-ring big show that they had done. But frankly speaking, if you looked at the show, it should have been modernized years ago.
Yeah.
And if you look at the acts that Cirque du Soleil have, and then you look at Seven Fingers and you look at the other companies that come out, they then become more dance or theatre oriented, but they have that skill base. To me, circus is about skill.
Yeah.
Absolute physical bodily skill brought to the level of risk that is quite astonishing. And I think the companies that come out of Canada, I saw the Lumberjack Boys from Quebec, and they were amazing, absolutely incredible. I mean, there's always 5 or 6 Canadian companies at any given time at Edinburgh Festival. And then you've got Cirque Columbia. You've got so many international. And in Britain, we have 50 circus companies at the moment touring, ranging from classic circus, which is more traditional big top. But we don't have any animals. We haven't had any animals for 30 years.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah. So the argument in America with the animal circus is, there's 20 countries worldwide now have banned animals, but those still have circus.
Exactly.
To me, it's just another aspect of circus development. 100 years ago, Barnum would have a hue, or 150 years ago, Barnum and Bailey, when they put the show together in 1871, would have a huge display. They would have a narrative. They would have, 150 performers. But within 20 years, you would have another circus that would be like a variety show, act. So I think people have their own set ideas of circus they watched as a child or as a young adult, and don't realise it's an evolving art form. You wouldn't go to a theatre show now and expect to see a theatre play or show that you saw 50 years ago, would you?
Exactly.
So why would you expect that with circus?
Exactly. And so it will continue to evolve and change and entertain people.
Exactly. And the community, and especially the big training skill they want to build in Montreal, will enable the skill to be passed on and learned and continued. That was the worrying thing 40 years ago. The traditional circus companies were no longer competing, and there was no one to carry on the tradition. So the development of circus schools all over the world where people can learn is a fantastic thing, and has reinvented the circus again.
Exactly. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Professor Toulmin, so much for informing us and enlightening us about the history of circus. We've learned so much, and I'm sure our audience has learned so much today. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you, and keep on continuing great Canadian circus.
Thank you very much. Good talking to you. Thank you. We'll return after this short break.
Hey, how's it going, folks? It's Tyler here. For your weekly fix of my weekly mix of rock and alternative music from the 90s all the way up to the current stuff, tune in a couple of nights a week for Alt Rock Overload, right here on Voices for Ability Radio.
There is an incredible community in Gibsonton, Florida called Gibtown, built by and for freak show, sideshow, and circus performers. The following History Channel segment about Gibtown is from a show called Weird U.S., and it's followed by a song called Gibtown by Al Scortino.
Every summer, carnivals like this sprout up across the American landscape. It's a place to have fun, eat some cotton candy. You can ride the Ferris wheel, go through the haunted house, go on the bumper cars, and even take the little kiddies on the dragon wagon.
But after a few neon-filled nights, these carnivals and sideshows pack up their tents seemingly in the middle of the night. They're destined for a stint in another town somewhere else down the road. But where do the carnies all go when winter rolls around?
We're going to take a little trip to Gibsonton, Florida, to a town that has a lot of weird history.
So how did Gibtown become the place where carnies go to disappear until the next circus season? Well, in 1936, Al the Giant Tomani and his wife Jeannie the Half-Girl chose Gibsonton as their winter retreat.
Soon after, their carnival friends like the Lobster Boy and Monkey Girl would follow. When winter brought the circus tents down, Gibsonton became an off-season retreat for acrobats, fire eaters, contortionists, and freaks.
We drove around town to see if we could find any colorful carnies like the Human Seal or Monkey Girl walking the streets.
But after a full day of roaming around with no sightings, we were told the best place to find the strange and unusual in Gibtown was the Showtown Bar.
Go to Showtown.
We just needed the guts to go in.
When I first got here, it reminded me of something out of the movie Deliverance. Once you started looking at the people and not what they look like, everyone's just beautiful here.
That's why this little town was created, for people like that. They're not outcast here. They can walk into the restaurant. They can walk into the bar. It's a place that was created for carnival and circus people. There's a lot of families here in town that have lived here for generations in the carnival business. I've raised my whole family here, and it's just a nice neighborhood. You can still drive down the streets here and still see the circus performers out practicing, the carnival people painting their trucks, the Ferris wheels being set up. We have a cemetery, we have a scholarship, we have it's the only town in the whole country like it.
I've been here 14 years and I ain't planning on moving.
You're a carny at heart, man. That's why you ended up down here at Gibtown.
Our new friends from the bar last night told us to check out Giant's Camp restaurant. This is where a lot of carnies here for the winter start their day with coffee and scrambled eggs. But when we walked in, you could have heard a pin drop.
Hey, get out!
No one at the Giants Camp wanted to talk to us on camera. Were they hiding out from ex-wives, alimony, and the IRS? We were thinking that strange and unusual people in Gibtown might be a thing of the past. To find out, we got a tip to track down one of Gibtown's most famous residents.
Here we go!
When illusionist Roy Houston traveled with the carnival back in its heyday, his show was a must-see live performance.
Show us what you got here, Roy.
Boy.
Oh, man.
There it is. All 65 crates.
Wow. Oh, man.
But other entertainment, such as TV and movies, began competing with sideshows. And now it seems the sight of human oddities or a magician sawing a woman in half will be relegated to nostalgia.
Roy, how do you think people down here in Gibsonton feel about the death of the sideshows?
Well, it's all nostalgia now, I guess. yeah, we all feel bad about it. It was an art form all by itself. It's something that's just now, it's just gone. In fact, usually it's very difficult to date right to the exact second when something died. Well, boy, I can really do this one for you because my next door neighbor, Ward Hall, had the last sideshow in America. And last Halloween, Ward had his sideshow set up. And right there, Ward announced, this is it. He said, you'll never see the sideshow in the air ever again. And that was
Farewell
it.
to freaks.
That was it, man. And I thought he was kidding.
Thanks for the great tour there, Roy.
Glad to have you.
Thanks, Roy. It was really something.
Okay, very good. Thank you, guys. All righty.
Could Roy be right?
Hey, bye-bye.
Could this be the death of the sideshow? Almost 70 years ago, Gibsonton, Florida became the unofficial winter home for those who performed in the carnivals and sideshows.
And the king of the sideshow is Ward Hall, who claims to have performed in every state except Alaska. We made an appointment with the legendary Mr. Hall to ask him if he thought the circus sideshow would soon be relegated to weird history.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Hall?
I am indeed.
How are you?
You're Mark.
Yep.
And you must be Mark. I've
Yes,
been
I am.
expecting you. Won't you come in?
Thank you very much.
Ward Hall's World of Wonders brought the strange and unusual right to your hometown.
Ladies and gentlemen, the World of Wonders is the largest circus sideshow in the world. Please remember the attractions here are not pictures, and you're going to see a show that you'll remember for the rest of your life. Ladies and gentlemen, the show's ready to start. There goes Mark swallowing the sword. Thank you, Mark. Hurry along. It's showtime.
I'm in. I'm sold. Let's go.
But things have changed here in Gibtown, and the sideshow legends of the past are getting harder to find.
The show may be over for the Human Seal, but we did meet someone who's been eating fire in Ward's sideshow since the early days.
So, Pete, how did you hook up with Ward here? How long have you been working together?
I started in 1954. Wow. Ever since.
Pete's been with me now since 1954. He's the oldest one.
Can you tell us about some of the stranger acts that you've featured in your sideshow over the years?
Well, yes. I think there's been so many. Among the very strange people that I had was Emmett and Priscilla Buchanan. She was the monkey girl, and her husband was the alligator skin man. Did they want to be in the sideshow? I could give you numerous examples of why it was a wonderful thing for people to be in a sideshow. I'm going to take probably the greatest sideshow star who ever lived, and that was Betty Lou Williams. She came from a very poverty-stricken family in Albany, Georgia. When she was born, her baby sister was a parasitic twin. It grew out of her abdomen. And at the height of her career, she was earning about $5,000 a week. That would be the equivalent in today's money of about $75,000 a week. Wow. So did you think she wanted to be in show business?
There's no smoking gun as to why freaks like Betty Lou Williams are disappearing in Gibtown, but undoubtedly better medical care during pregnancy and our politically correct times are factors.
Finally, even the day came when sideshow legend Ward Hall packed up his tent in 2003.
People just became a little harder to shock, right? Was that really the death of the sideshow, do you think?
First of all, you said, is that the death of the sideshow? The sideshow didn't die. Sideshow today, if you can put one on somewhere, is just as popular and more money-making than ever. You'd have to hire 2 or 3 people just to count your money.
Ward Hall is the ultimate showman, and his optimism got us believing the sideshow isn't dead yet.
We found a couple of sideshow performers living in Gibtown who are still bringing the show to your town each year. We're about to meet Matthew Bouvier and his wife Felicity, and they are some of the younger entertainers we've met here in Gibtown.
Good morning, Matthew.
Hey,
Hi, Felicity.
Hi, Felicity. It's just like throwing a baseball. Oh! Don't try to spin it. Just throw it. Just keep that wrist straight, and.
Do you think I have a career in this carnival life?
Let's not find out. I can't teach you anymore. It's already competitive enough.
Most of the people we met here are kind of semi-retired or just traveling through. You guys look a little younger. Can you explain that to me?
Well, we kind of break the rules. You see, Gibtown was real big when the carnival industry was focused more on the live entertainment. Well, now the live entertainment aspect of it's pretty much gone, but you're mainly in a very submerged into a show business community, which is nice. And they're the only city in the entire country that is zoned residential show business, which means I can park my RV here, I can park my show here, I could park an elephant here if I wanted to. But it's fun, you know, I sit out here with my carny buddies in the neighborhood and we throw knives all day long and drink beer.
Barbecue and beer drinking and knife throwing, man.
That's what it's about, you know.
Relaxation.
Put on a little Dick Dale, fire up the barbecue, and we're happy. Good, baby.
All right, why don't you hold some flowers for me?
Okay.
Yeah, do one.
So how fond are you of that nose?
All right, Chocolate, ready to go for a ride? Oh!
Be on the lookout for Matthew and Felicity when the carnival rolls into your town this year.
Thanks.
There's a place that I remember down along a twisted river. It's a circus come the winter time. It's just off the road to nowhere, and the carnies always go there. It's like having family for a while. And you can meet the bearded lady, the tattooed girl will drive you crazy. The gypsy might just read your mind. midget and the fire eater, the Siamese twins are both named Peter. Here in Gibtown, they're all right. Park your trailer by the river. The Giant's place is great for dinner. The whole town seems to show up dinner time. If you've got some time to kill, check out the Showtown Bar and Grill. The clowns down there will serve you with a smile. You can meet the bearded lady. The tattooed girl will drive you crazy. The gypsy might just read your mind. The midget and the fire eater, the Siamese twins are both named Peter. Here in Gibtown, they're all right. Elephants and busted rides, shattered dreams and darker sides. This town has seen its share. But you know that come the springtime, they'll be heading for the big time and say goodbye until next year. Mostly folks just look away. I guess they don't know what to say. Inside, they're just like me and you. The lobster boy and monkey girl weren't from another world. While they were here, they sure paid their dues. You can meet the bearded lady. Tattooed girl will drive you crazy. The gypsy might just read your mind. The midget and the fire eater, the Siamese twins are both named Peter. Here in Gibtown, they're all right. You can meet the bearded lady. The tattooed girl will drive you crazy. Gypsy might just read your mind. The midget and the fire eater, the Siamese twins are both named Peter. Here in Gibtown, they're all right. Yeah, here in Gibtown, they're all right.
To see the videos, go to YouTube and search Weird US in Gibsonton, Freakville, USA, and Gibtown. Sadly, Ward Hall, who was featured in the segment, passed away in August 2018. We'll return after this short break.
Hey, how's it going, folks? It's Tyler here. For your weekly fix of my weekly mix of rock and alternative music from the 90s all the way up to the current stuff, tune in a couple of nights a week for Alt Rock Overload, right here on Voices for Ability Radio.
I was recently introduced to the amazing talent of Sarah Hubold. Sarah is a self-described natural-born freak, physical theater and circus performer, competed in the 2000 Sydney Paralympic Games as a swimmer, is a disability advocate, and has a degree in political science, among many other accomplishments. Sarah is speaking with me today from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you very much.
Now, Sarah, you are a rare person and a rare performer, and you're a self-declared natural-born freak. What makes you so unique? Why have you chosen to declare yourself as a natural-born freak?
Yeah, I'm really interested in the history of freak show, and I think the term natural-born freak has been reclaimed and is actually quite a positive label to give yourself as a performer. And the reason is because, you know, it's hard to be a performer with a disability in these contemporary times where there's so many barriers to be doing your skills on stage and on screen. And so we often forget that if we draw from our history, there's a lot of strength and has a solid ground to stand on. So I'm a circus performer, and I started looking at the history of circus, and in particular history of circus and people with disabilities, which led me to the Freak Show. And when I started researching the Freak Show, I realised it was the safest place for performers to be at the time of the Freak Show, because there's a lot of social inequality. It was a place where they could earn money, and they were basically royalty and really had a better life. So in order to bring that idea of the natural-born freak forward, I'm really actually busting the myths of the freak shows and going, you know what, we've come from a really strong place performatively, and I don't want that history to be changed or altered. So it's a little about safeguarding of history, and it's a little bit about acknowledging my uniqueness. So I have a rare syndrome, and it means that my hair never grew. I wear glasses. My eyes are a bit funny. They're a bit wobbly and wonky, and my nose is a bit funny. And it's like, well, I've never seen anyone like me on stage or screen in recent times. But when I go back to the freak show history, I see people I can identify with, and they called themselves natural born freak and got a lot of strength from it. So that's why I'm doing the same. It's a really empowering term.
And taking the term back, right? Because for so long it had a negativity, so it's turning it back into something positive, correct?
Yeah, correct. I mean, freak had a really negative vibe to it. And also a lot of people without disability are using the word freak for themselves without knowing where it came from and what it actually historically means. So I really don't want to see the term being watered down or diluted in that sense, because with the term freak comes the situation around it. To work with a performer who is a natural-born freak, it means we need accessible environments. So if we lose the whole concept of what natural-born freak means, then we're not doing it justice either. So the term natural-born freak is when you're born with a difference or a deformity. So in the past, that could also include the half men, half women, for example. So it's quite a broad term, but it just means someone who's born, genetically different.
You have a great view on inclusion versus exclusion. Can you explain that for our listeners?
Sure. My viewpoint around inclusion is that I like to talk about contribution, because inclusion versus exclusion sets up a dichotomy. And basically, as performers with disability or disabled performers, I'm not sure what you say in Canada, but here in Australia we say performers with disability. I want us to be valued for our contribution. So if we keep talking about, please include us, we're actually not getting to the point of going, you know what, I have this, and this to offer. And my access leads to really innovative practice. So actually, you know what, come to my table. Let me include you in my way of thinking. So I like to flip the table a little bit and invite people to my conversation. And my conversation is all around, contribution. And then this is what I need in order to contribute.
Aside from having a degree in politics, you're a Paralympic swimmer and a physical theater performer, circus performer, what inspired you to become a physical theater performer and circus performer?
So I was really physically fit because of the Paralympics. I was training 10 times a week, and I reached that elite ultimate goal. And then I'm kind of expedient. I'm like, okay, cool, what's next? And I thought, the same physicality is what they use in trapeze, so I may as well try that. So I joined a women's circus. At the time I was living in Brisbane in Australia, and there's an amazing women's circus there called Volcana. And it was a real sense of community and belonging. So initially it was for me to connect with other people and to have a hobby. And then I developed my practice and became an emerging artist and then a mid-career artist. And I'm so thankful that circus is in my life. I like the physicality. I like moving around space. I'm partially sighted. I'm legally blind. So it means that, traditionally my community sits in a corner and isn't exposed to the rest of the world unless someone shows them the rest of the world. So I'm like, I'm going to go out there and use my physicality as much as I can and build that sense of kinesthetic sphere and that intuitive knowledge of walking around the world without sight. So I'm super interested in what we can do with our bodies.
And some of your acts, such as what I've seen, the silk performance, the firework, the nail work, can be daunting for someone with full vision. Can you please talk to people about the myth of safety?
So I do sideshow stunts within my freak show performance. So the freak show performance is around the genetic anomaly and reclaiming that space. And the sideshow performance is the acts that I actually do. So I use bed of nails, I use blockhead, which is sticking nails up the nose. I do aerials, I walk on glass. And for me, that's all about the tactile realm. So my viewpoint is that if you're partially sighted or blind, your heightened skills, or the skills, the senses that you know how to use more so than other people, are your sense of touch and your sense of hearing, and to be able to do things without necessarily entering the visual world. So I use my sense of touch in order to navigate the bed of nails, or to work out how to put that nail up the nose, or I do blindfolded aerials over a bed of nails, and I think that is basically the circus principle of use what you've got. So for me, because I know what touch means and I know what the messages are, when you touch something, you know what it is quicker than someone who has sight, because we're used to operating in that landscape. So when I'm doing aerials, it's about touching an object. So it's more safe, I think, for a blind person to do aerials, because we know what it is to touch an object. So, a lot of people don't understand that. I think it's really counterintuitive, but it's actually just, making sure people understand our skills and our strengths.
I think it's probably, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because sighted people are so used to obviously using their sight, they don't think about the fact of touch being such a strong sense, especially if it's the only thing you've got.
Yeah, correct, because they haven't trained it. They're so reliant on their eyesight at the top of the sensory hierarchy, whereas we've got the capacity to teach them a thing or two,
Absolutely. And your act, Cuckoo the Bird Girl, can you tell our audience about who Cuckoo was and what you do in your act?
Yeah, sure. So Cuckoo the Bird Girl was a character from Todd Browning's film Freaks from 1932. Now, this film was amazing. It was controversial, but it was revolutionary because it had a lot of disabled performers with disability, like actresses and actors and sideshow performers, actually casting the film and speaking in lead roles at a time where we were meant to be locked in the asylums. We were not meant to be seen in public. We had all these restrictive laws that sort of defined our lives. And so when Todd Browning decided to do this film and cast all these people, these amazing performers, the film consequently got banned for 30 years because people weren't ready to see that. Now, this is a film from 1932, and we need to hold this as a little bit of a treasure, because we can say that we've always been performers, we've always been on stage and screen. So Cuckoo was in this film, and the woman who played Cuckoo was called Minnie Woolsey, and she was born in an asylum, an institution in Southern America, and then she toured around the circus route. Her first character was Minnie Ha Ha, then she played Cuckoo, and then after the film she went to Coney Island Circus Sideshow and was the blind girl from Mars. So she had a whole career, a whole lifetime of performing, as opposed to living in that asylum. So I find that a really amazing story, and one that people don't know about. And the uncanny thing for me that I found out is that I actually look almost exactly like her. And it is the first time I've seen someone exactly like me in the art. So that was quite a strong moment for me. It became part of my practice in order to tell her story.
And I've seen Freaks, and I've listened to the Warner Home Movies specialist outtakes afterwards, and when he's reading the reviews from the 30s, and the reviews by critics and the public was so venomous at the time. It was so brave of Todd Browning to do this, even though it ruined his career. It was a brave move for him to make that film in the first place.
It was a super brave move, and I think, we talk about disability-led and we talk about disability leadership, and we absolutely need to be in positions of power, and we need to be in arts management jobs and A-list actors and actresses. But we also need to recognise our allies, and Todd Browning was definitely an ally for our community and took that massive risk, and that's absolutely something we need to honour.
Absolutely. For you, what pathways are you trying to pave, or what would you like to see created for future artists with disabilities that come after you?
Just more opportunities in movies, in TV, on stage, and in arts management roles. So we need to be visible. We need to see each other's successes in order to just keep going, because it's a hard, hard world out there. So, I take a lot of strength from the disability community, and knowing that we've got amazing success stories around the globe. And I think it's very important to stay globally connected, and also really important to know how to talk about our politics, because we can't lose sight of that. You know, we need to know where we've come from and we need to know where we're going. So I hope that people coming after me continue to push the envelope, continue to push the boundaries and make really, really exciting work. And it doesn't have to be about disability. It can be about anything, but just to be present and public, because we're so in danger of being shut away. So it's super important for us to be out there and proud.
Absolutely. And to not have fear, just if you want to do it, go for it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it is scary, though. I mean, it's undeniably scary, but that's why we need to stick together, because we support each other through that.
Exactly.
So, we just keep going.
Yeah, keep moving forward. And speaking of moving forward, what can we look forward to for performances from you in the future? Have you got anything new in the works?
Yeah, this is my first year of being international, so I'm super excited. So at the moment, I'm doing my solo show, Poopy the Bird Girl, at Melbourne Fringe, and I hope to pitch it and tour it next year, hopefully. I'm looking at taking it to the UK, and I'd like to do it in New York. I'd like to perform at Coney Island. I'd like to do more film and TV stuff. Later on this year, I'm going to be working with Extant, the theatre company in the UK. That's the artistic director is Maria, and I really admire her work. So it's super nice to be recognised and to do these international projects. So I want to build on that.
And hopefully we'll see you in Canada at some point.
Oh, I'd love to come to Canada. Yeah, there's a woman I've been speaking to, Alex, who's an amazing writer, and she's doing great work, and I'd like to work with her. So maybe I will be in Canada sooner than we think.
Fingers crossed, right? Absolutely.
Fingers crossed, absolutely.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
We'll return after this short break.
Do you have a disability? Do you have dreams of being in the broadcasting field? Do you feel your disability prevents you from achieving your broadcasting dreams? Well, it doesn't have to be that way any longer. Connect for Life's an accessible voice in broadcasting. It's the first radio broadcasting program in Canada that is specifically designed for people with disabilities. During the 24-week course, you will learn how to write and put together news articles, how to edit audio and get actual on-air experience, and so much more. So don't delay and register today and be one step closer to achieving your broadcasting dreams. Space is limited. For more information or to register for this program, please contact Melanie Taddeo at 647-454-1252 or Melanie at connectforlife.ca.
In my research for this show, I came across a story about a sideshow performer from the 1880s, promoted as the Camel Girl. Her real name was Ella Harper. I was very intrigued by the picture of this sweet-faced young girl whose legs bent forward and what her life was like. Joining me to talk about Ella Harper is Ray Mullins, who has researched her life intensively and has a blog called Finding Ella, My Search for the Camel Girl. Ray is speaking with me today from Rio Rancho, New Mexico. He's a genealogy blogger and researcher. Thank you for speaking with me today, Ray.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure.
Good to talk to you. Tell me, first of all, how you found out about Ella Harper and what interested you about her.
I had been just going through the news, and I came across an article about the TV show American Horror Freak Show. And it was all about the real people that it was going to be based on. So I went to the article, and you know how the internet is. You go from one thing to the other. Next thing I knew, I came across Ella, and she was quite different, and she was also from Tennessee, which is where I was living at the time. So I got real interested in her. And disappointed because there was nothing known about it.
And that's the thing. Like, I'm sure most people haven't heard of her. Could you explain what disability she had?
Gina Reed Curvatum, it's basically backwards knees. So she walked very differently, and it made her resemble a camel. So that's why she's called the Camel Girl.
That's why she ended up in freak shows and sideshows. And that was a way for her to make money with what she had, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's talk about the double-edged sword that was the life of sideshow performers with disabilities, particularly Ella at the time.
Sure.
In your research, what did you find her experience was? I understand she was only performing for, 2 years?
Something like that, yes, roughly. Prior to her going in there, P.T. Barnum had started all of this thing, with big promotions and all of this. And this is when a lot of them really started making good money. And so Ella, come about 1884, when she was about 14, she started on the road with it. And and was making very good money. You know, by the time she got out of it, she was making the equivalent of about $5,000 a week. You know, very, very well set there for quite some time. So for her, at that time, it was good. I mean, even though people were coming in to gawk at her, she was making really good money. Now, how does she feel about it? I don't know. And I consider that the fact that she was a young teenager at the time, probably didn't handle it too well.
Yeah, I would think. You've been in touch with her family, correct?
I've been in touch with 2 or 3 different members of her family, 3 actually. Yeah.
So they didn't know have any letters or anything about what her emotional experience was in that?
No, absolutely not. One of them, Ella had a sister named Willie that had died in 1895. And her great-granddaughter I've talked to, and they had no clue that Ella was even there. Even though they were doing the genealogy, they hadn't found out about what Ella was truly like.
Right.
And so they were, quite tickled to run across that. And I got a friend from Texas that had contacted me. She was from Ella's foster brother down that side, and she had contacted me first. And she wasn't that aware of Ella. She knew of her as far as in the tree, but that's all she had.
Because Ella only performed for 2 years, my understanding that she left to go back to school. Is that what you found?
Well, that's what she was supposed to be doing. I mean, that's what was on her pitch card, that she wanted to go back and have a regular life and go to school and learn a skill. But actually, part of it too, I think, is that, she was being passed off as being part camel, because they would lie about a lot of these things during these side shows. Mm-hmm. I saw some newspaper accounts where she had been debunked by the reporters. So and right after that is when she disappeared from the newspaper.
Right. So she was probably being harassed because of being debunked.
Yes. Yeah. More than likely.
And especially if you are a teenager and you're dealing with self-esteem issues to begin with, that's just going to compound things. Absolutely.
And she was at the ripe old age of 16 at the time.
Wow. She was so young. From what I understand of your research, you've found out that it seems to be a genetic thing in her family because there's recent family members that have had some similar issues health-wise?
Yes. That first friend of mine from Texas, one that comes from the foster brother, due to her DNA, we were able to find out that her foster brother was actually Ella's half-brother. This particular woman in Texas, she had to have some surgery on her when she was first born. Not in the knees, but it was dealing with joints. The great-granddaughter that I talked to, Willie, her daughter had to have some work done. And that's 2 right in the direct lines there. So that tells me that it's the Harper side, because that's the side that the friend in Texas comes from.
Okay. Did she have a twin brother that died early?
Yes, she had a twin brother. Didn't know about him at first. He was only a few months old when he died, so we don't know, but we suspect that it may have been, a similar kind of a thing but he just didn't survive. But there's nothing, I haven't found anything concrete, anything in the records or anything that shows that was definitely the case.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. If he died so young and she had the condition that she did, there's probably a connection, although infant mortality was so high at that time, it's hard to say, but it sounds like it.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah. Were you able to find out anything else about Ella's life after the sideshow, or she just disappeared from the records?
She did disappear after that until the 1900 census when I found her, because the 1890 census burned up. It doesn't exist. Wow. And she is living with her mother back in Tennessee. Within a few years, they moved to Nashville together, and where Ella meets a young man named Robert Sabely, whom she marries in 1905.
Wow. Okay. Did they have any children?
Yes, they did. The following year, they had a young daughter named Mabel, who died at about 5 months old. And then the following year, several years later, they adopted another girl who was actually an infant when they adopted her, and she was only about a month old when she died.
Wow, so she just had a very overall sad life.
It actually kind of gets to you when you go through this thing, and you get kind of attached to some of these people when you're researching them. And I've done 30-some blogs. Ella is still my favorite. Probably always will be.
Why is that?
It was a pretty sad life. Yeah.
Why was Ella your favorite?
I guess I felt for her really badly because the things she was going through. Here's this odd disability that she can do nothing about, and it's ruining her life to a point. She was fortunate enough when she did get in the side shows that this was during a time when they could make a lot of money. That was different early on, and it changed later on in the freak shows in the 1900s. That all changed, but at her time, it was good money. You know, they could make friends, they could meet spouses, you know, all kinds of things. So it wasn't always a bad thing for them. Many of them would defend their job in it, you know.
Well, and that's where it's double-edged, right? Because they did build communities by some of them. For example, the little people that worked in the shows, it was the first time they ever met another little person, correct?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and
but it was others. I mean, you could have a bearded lady marrying a thin man. I mean, you know, just for example, just something like that. I mean, many of them met people that they and found love that they never probably would have found if they'd stayed home.
Exactly. So even though they were being exploited, there was a positivity to it. They had community.
Yes.
So at least something positive came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ray, for joining me today. Ella's story has been so enlightening, and thank you for bringing her story out of the shadows to a new audience.
Oh, it was my pleasure to research her and my pleasure to tell you about it.
Thanks so much, Ray.
All right.
In Canada, we have our own history of freak and sideshows and circuses, and I recently visited the tent of a modern-day sideshow called the Mental Floss Sideshow at Buskerfest in Toronto. Joining me to talk about sideshows in Canada and about their own family history in the industry are Leslie and Carl Thurston Brown. Leslie and Carl, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Can you tell us about the Mental Floss Sideshow and how you picked the name and how you pay homage to the sideshows of the past? It's fascinating.
So our company, Mental Floss Sideshow, we kind of have two angles to what we do. One is a traveling museum, which is full of weird and wonderful exhibits, and we do storytelling. And a lot of it is based in myth and legend and hoaxes, all things that were very popular in the entertainment area of this era of the sideshow. And then the other part of what we do is we have a stage performance called Feats of Daring Do, and Professor Archibald Floss, aka Carl, and myself do a number of stunts, if you will. So glass walking, straitjacket escape,
human blockhead,
the human blockhead,
bed of nails,
a bed of nails, And the name Mental Floss Sideshow actually comes from a sideshow stunt. It's kind of a step beyond the human blockhead. So the human blockhead involves a hammer, a nail, and Professor Floss's face.
Oh, wow.
It's quite eye-opening. The mental floss involves actually putting something through the nose and comes out through the mouth. Again, quite eye-opening act. We like the sort of metaphor, though, for the mental floss, which is to kind of like clean out the space between your ears.
Exactly.
That's exactly what it brings to mind, the image,
Yeah.
Very cool. Carl, you trained, I understand, with the Coney Island Sideshow and Burlesque Show. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so back in 2005, right in the very, very early days of the show, well, basically the year that the show was born, I took out a loan. I was living in the UK at the time. I took out a loan so I could go and do the course. It was, like you said, Coney Island. It was taught by Todd Robbins, who is very much an important character on the modern sideshow scene. He's totally worth checking out. So that was a real pleasure to be taught by him, but it was a fascinating course. I did it on the intensive because I came from a distance. So it was basically 5 days of 9 to 5 doing all kinds of mad stuff like smashing tins of food on your finger to walking up ladders of swords with bare feet, fire eating, fire breathing, you name it. Yeah, it was awesome and I can highly recommend it to anybody.
Yeah, it sounds painful but interesting for anybody who wants to train to do that. Sounds like great on-the-job training.
Indeed, right? And then it was great being taught by somebody who I have a lot of respect for, and somebody who's an important character on the scene. But what was funny was when I was getting all my legal papers in order, I had to, of course, get insurance, medical insurance for the trip, so we just fibbed about it. We told them nothing untoward was going to happen.
Luckily it didn't.
Thankfully.
You're just driving nails into your flesh, right? No big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
No possible way to get injured.
You went to the school to learn how to do it safely, right?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah, so basically I wanted to learn the historical way, basically being taught by somebody that performs the acts himself. What we're about is very much about the history of sideshow, and so everything that we do, we try to be taught by somebody who's a professional who really knows what they're talking about.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And lastly, I understand your family were sideshow people in the Victorian era. Can you tell us about that and how they inspired inspired you to become a sideshow performer?
Yeah, when I was a little girl, my grandmother, who was from Liverpool originally but came here to Ontario when she was in her 20s, she used to tell me about her uncles who were traveling show folk and her aunts who were gypsies. That was the language that she used. And I used to sort of imagine and dream about this. I thought it sounded quite romantic, the idea of traveling with the fairs across England, you know, the kind of carnival atmosphere and the sort of entertainments that were around back then. And I found myself living in England when I was in my 20s. And after a period of time, I thought I'd try and find out a bit more about these ancestors. Because really that little snippet of information was a big chunk of what I knew. And sure enough, I found my great-great-grandfather and his wife on the census in England as traveling show folk. They, I think, worked more with carnival games as opposed to performing. But my grandmother's uncle married into a family who did marionette shows, which is quite fascinating. And for me, it was kind of like I found the family business I was meant to join.
In the blood, definitely.
Yeah, I met Carl just around the time that he was going off to Coney Island to do this study. And yeah, it all just kind of came together.
Sounds like it.
Never looked back.
Yeah.
And what have you discovered in your career, and I know you're historians as well, about the history of sideshows, specifically in Canada?
Sure. Basically, it's quite hard to find a lot of information about the history of sideshow in Canada. Predominantly, you come across a lot of the American stuff. And, you know, the American companies did come up into Canada and put on shows. But we did just recently find out about a new book that came out earlier this year, just in April, called Canadian Carnival Freaks and the Extraordinary Body from 1900 to 1970s, written by a lady by the name of Jane Nicholas, who's an associate professor at the Department of Sexuality, Marriage and Family Studies in the University of Waterloo. That book is the first real proper scholarly examination of Canadian sideshow history. So yeah, that only just got released this year. We haven't got a copy yet, so we're looking forward to reading it. But you know, there are other things as well that we're aware of. There was the great Farini, who was born he was born in Lockport, New York, but he moved to Port Hope when he was about 4 or 5, and then, so yeah, he grew up in Port Hope. No, this is what I found out. And basically he went on to have a massive career particularly in the UK and in Europe. He was very much instrumental in finding one of the most important, or one of the major stars of sideshow at the time, which was Crowell the Missing Link, Darwin's Missing Link, which is basically just a very hirsute lady, really, young lady.
Young girl.
Yeah, young girl.
When she started traveling with the circuses and the sideshows, her exact origin is a little hazy, but she actually carried on working with Farini and then going on to work with Barnum when she was a young woman. It's kind of an example of someone who was born with some difference being brought out and exhibited, and it's a very interesting history because there are some performers who were on the sideshow circuit who were very much willing participants and in control of their presentation, and they were kind of their own managers, if you will. But then there are examples in the sideshow world as well where perhaps people who either didn't have the capacities for making their own decisions, or they were brought into the circuit at very, very young age. You know, there's stories of people perhaps not being treated under the best circumstances and that sort of thing. So it's quite a wide-ranging and fascinating history.
So, of course, there are stories of exploitation within the field, of course, but then again, it's not that majorly different to any other field of work. You know, just about every field of work has some level of exploitation involved in it. Just at the sideshow, it's kind of a bit more obvious. But like Lisa was saying, a lot of the performers were actually doing it out of personal choice, and at the time making if you were to transfer the amount of monies that they were making then to what the equivalent would be now, they were making crazy amounts of money, the performers themselves. Enough so that somebody like Betty Lou Williams was able, she had a parasitic twin coming out from her belly. She earned enough that she was able to look after her immediate family and then like the next part of the family, so like her aunties and her uncles and their families and stuff, just on the single wage.
And from what I understand about her, she was making the equivalent of what would be per week now about $75,000.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's quite
exactly.
incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what other guests that have been on the show for this episode have brought up, is that, yes, they were exploited, but at the same time, they had community, they were able to meet other people and get married and make money, and so it was very much a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's interesting, too, how, changing public sensibilities about, people putting themselves on display just in general have changed as years have gone on. I remember when I was a little girl actually going to the Canadian National Exhibition, and I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old. So this would have been like in the early 80s, just to age myself. There was the world's smallest man. Big hoarding with lots of colorful writing and things like that. And of course, I was like, oh, what am I going to see? And it was little Eddie Taylor, who was a traveling entertainer. He was a singer, and he just happened to be of very short stature as well.
Wow.
But it's interesting, the history of the CNE, you can actually have a look at they have a website about the heritage of the CNE, and they've got some photographs from the teens, the 20s, where they have these traditional old-fashioned sideshows with sorts of different characters as part of the show and on display.
And then I've also got photos of one of the maddest sports I've ever heard of, which is motor car polo.
Oh,
it's insane.
It'd be interesting to see how they pulled that off.
Dangerously.
No kidding. Exactly. And it's interesting when you talk about the fact that most of the sideshows that were on in Canada, aside from the CNE and things like that, but probably actually also the CNE, most of them were actually American shows coming up to Canada. Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out why.
Yeah, I know that Conklin, which is here in Canada, I know that they also did some of their own work.
Yeah, they sure did.
Not a lot of it is that we have accessed so far has been written up terribly. I mean, there are some wonderful history books about the touring sideshows and freak shows, as they were known. But I think, perhaps people born in Canada who maybe would fall into the category of going on to perform in these shows would end up at different times hooking up with outfits from the States. And as I say, they would travel all over. So.
It makes sense, particularly considering that, most of Hollywood was founded by Canadians.
Yes.
And Mary Pickford was from Canada. So those Canadian performers, even whether they were disabled or not, were heading to the U.S. because there wasn't enough work for them here.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what we've come to realize, or come to discover so far, yeah.
It seems that way, yeah.
Yeah. Or even to Europe, right? And London was a big place as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Europe in general, but particularly London, because there were so many shows.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, as far as Mental Floss goes, have you got anything new in the works for Mental Floss? What's coming in the future?
Well, currently we're still finishing our sort of touring season, so we're performing at Discovery Harbour the next couple of weekends, and then at Lang Pioneer Village at the end of the month. You can find information about that on our Facebook and Instagram pages. But in terms of development, we are working on a book which documents a lot of the stories that we tell in our Cabinet of Curiosities for the Incurably Curious, and so we're quite excited about the development of that.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of old stories that we're not using anymore, but it's a way of kind of bringing them back to the surface and elaborating and kind of playing around and creating further elements to them and stuff. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we create all new exhibits for our Cabinet of Curiosities every year, so we'll be spending quite a bit of the winter months making new artifacts and coming up with new stories, which is a lot of fun.
So all the stories that we have inside the tent, all the exhibits that we have, the stories are all based in truth. Sometimes there's a tiny little seed of truth that grows into a fantastic story. Other times it's the whole truth and nothing but. Because sometimes fact is way, way, way stranger than fiction.
Very true. Very true. Well, Carl and Leslie, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been fascinating, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's lovely chatting with you.
You too. Thank you. Probably the most famous story of a person with a disability who was exhibited in freak shows was Joseph Merrick, 1862 to 1890, also known as the Elephant Man. Joseph Carey Merrick, although his life started out well, as his condition progressed and his mother passed away when he was 11, did not have the resources or the positive support around him that he would have needed to have had a peaceful and comfortable life. Joseph Merrick's story also highlights the complete lack of protections and rights rights for persons with disabilities at that time. The following is an excerpt from the National Human Genome Institute website. Exhibitions of live human curiosities had appeared in traveling fairs, circuses, and taverns in England since the 1600s. These shows were still popular in 1862, when Joseph Carey Merrick, an apparently healthy baby, was born to Mary Jane and Joseph Merrick in Leicester, England. His parents attributed their son's development of lumpy grayish skin in early childhood to his mother being knocked over by a fairground elephant while she was pregnant. Despite increasing physical deformities, including the development of a bony lump on his forehead, Joseph had a relatively normal childhood. He attended school and had a close relationship with his mother until age 11, when she died of bronchial pneumonia. The next year, his father remarried, and Merrick left school to begin working. He rolled cigars for a few years until his right hand deformity worsened. He tried to sell items from his father's haberdashery shop door to door, but was unsuccessful because customers couldn't understand his speech and were frightened of him. At 17, he left home for the Leicester Union Workhouse after his father beat him for failing to earn enough money. He loathed the workhouse and after 4 years escaped it to work in the world of human oddities, where he was exhibited as half a man and half an elephant. In 1884, he moved to London, where he was displayed at a shop on Whitechapel Road directly across from the London Hospital. Physicians and surgeons visited Merrick at the shop, including surgeon Frederick Treves, who invited him to the hospital for an exam. Treves measured Merrick's head circumference at 36 inches, his right wrist at 12 inches, and one of his fingers at 5 inches in circumference. He noted that his skin was covered in warty growths, the largest of which exuded an unpleasant smell. Apart from his deformities and the lameness in his hip, Treves concluded that Merrick was in generally good health. Treves presented Merrick at a meeting of the Pathological Society of London, but Merrick declined further exams and presentations because they made him feel like an animal in a cattle market. By 1885, freak shows had fallen out of favor in Victorian England, and police closed the Elephant Man exhibit. Merrick's managers sent him to tour in Europe, where he was robbed, beaten, and abandoned. He eventually made his way back to London in 1886. Unable to communicate, police found Treves' business card on him. Treves came and took Merrick to the London hospital. Francis Carr Gomm, chairman of the hospital committee, supported Treves in his decision to admit Merrick, whose physical condition had deteriorated over the previous 2 years. However, the hospital was not equipped to care for incurables. When Carr Gomm approached other institutions and hospitals, they refused to accept Merrick. In an unusual letter to the Times newspaper, Carr Gomm outlined Merrick's case, which resulted in an outpouring of public support. With the financial backing of many donors, Carr Gomm was able to convince the hospital committee to provide Merrick a home in the hospital for the remainder of his life. Merrick's case attracted the notice of London's high society, including a visit from the Princess of Wales Alexandra. With the help of his supporters, Merrick was able to fulfill long-held desires to visit the theater and to vacation several times in the country. He spent his time writing prose, poetry, and creating an intricate church built out of playing cards. An avid letter writer, Merrick often ended his letters with a poem, False Greatness, by Isaac Watts. "'Tis true my form is something odd, but blaming me is blaming God. Could I create myself anew, I would not fail in pleasing you. If I could reach from pole to pole, or grasp the ocean with a span, I would be measured by the soul. The mind's the standard of the man." Merrick's condition gradually deteriorated during his 4 years at the London hospital. He required a great deal of care from the nursing staff and spent much of his time in bed or sitting in his quarters with diminishing energy. His facial deformities continued to grow, and his head became even more enlarged. He died on April 11, 1890, at the age of 27 from asphyxia, caused by the weight of his head as he lay down. As additional information to this episode, I recommend watching Todd Browning's 1932 movie Freaks, which you can order on Amazon, and watch the special feature content included. It gives great insight into the attitude toward disability in the early 1900s, and we will be discussing this movie in our January 2019 episode of Beautifully Broken, in which we look at Hollywood and disability. I hope you have enjoyed this first episode of Beautifully Broken as much as I have enjoyed bringing it to you. Thank you to all of my wonderful guests for their insight and expertise. Thank you also to my audio engineer, Sean Pickard, and to Voices for Ability Radio and Connect for Life. The logo design for Beautifully Broken was created by artist Priya Lee, www.priyalee.com. Opening music used in this show is Pulse by Melissa Etheridge. Some interviews were edited for time. To hear the complete interviews, go to my website, www.stephanierssaberan.com. If you would like to become a patron of Beautifully Broken, go to www.patreon.com and search Beautifully Broken or Stephanie R. Sabaron. Tune in next time when I will bring you stories and guests talking about the history of people with disabilities that rock the world. Until then, let's look to the past in order to steer our future.